Welcome back, everyone, to day 2. This morning, we have the pleasure of welcoming back the Committee on Equal Opportunities in Science and Engineering, known as CEOSE. CEOSE is a statutory committee that advises NSF on matters relating to opportunities for the participation in and the advancement of women, minorities, and persons with disabilities in education, training, and science and engineering research programs. Every 2 years by law, they produce a report on their activities, which also includes a review of data on participation and recommendations for NSF. And a summary of their report is in the board book. As closing the gap on the missing millions continues to be a major focus for this board, this presentation on CEOSE's recommendations for bold leadership actions to broaden participation in STEM will certainly be one of the highlights for board members. With that, I will turn to Anila to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Ellen. Welcome everyone to this special presentation on leadership strategies to address in general, to address the problem of the missing millions. And before we start, I'd like to ask board members and others in attendance to please turn off your cameras and to mute your microphones during the presentation. Today, we really are pleased to have the representatives from the CEOSE, from the Committee on Equal Opportunities in Science and Engineering. And our guest speakers are Dr. Jose Fuentes and Dr. Kaye Fealing, Chair and Vice Chair of CEOSE. Dr. Fuentes is a professor of meteorology at the Pennsylvania State University and has been recognized broadly for his efforts in promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the atmospheric and environmental sciences. Dr. Fealing is the Dean of the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts at the Georgia Institute of Technology. It's worth noting that she was the inaugural program director for NSF's Science of Science and Innovation Policy, that's SCISIP, now known as the Science of Science Discovery, Communication, and Impact, SOSDCI program. You can learn more about them and, of course, about CEOSE in the brief biography provided in the board book. And so now, with that, I've enjoyed, as chair of the Oversight Committee, meeting along with our board chair and vice chair, meeting at CEOSE occasionally and over the last year. And I'm very looking much forward to their presentation. Following the presentation, I expect board members will have questions for our guest speakers about how NSB can demonstrate and promote bold leadership actions to support the missing millions. So Jose and Kaye, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so very much for that really warm welcome. And also, I wish to express on behalf of all the CEOSE members, our thanks to the National Science Board for the support of the work that we do. So today, what we would like to do is to provide some of the highlights of the 2019-2020 biennial reports that we submitted to Congress. And also, I personally hope that we will continue our collaboration and we will put some time aside in this presentation for some dialogue or conversation. We really appreciate your input and commitment to broadening participation. Perhaps I can see the first slide if you have it there handy. Well, yes, right here, this is actually the front cover of our reports that we completed this year. Please go to the next slide. And one of the principles actually that guides all the deliberations within CEOSE is that broadening participation is not a problem to be fixed, but a critical strategy to promote and advance scientific research and learning that will develop at STEM folks that is representative of all the US citizens in the nation. We always get reminded about this, or we almost always start with this idea in our meetings. Please go to the next slide. And as was alluded to in the introduction, every 2 years we prepare and submit these reports. Here you have examples of the last 4 most recent reports. And I am proud to say that some of the recommendations that we articulate in our reports actually form the basis for programs such as the includes here that was developed as part of the recommendation that we provided in the 2011-2012 reports. And later, towards the end of our presentation here today, Kaye is going to tell us a little bit about this very important recommendation that we made to the foundation in the 2015-2016 report, which is about the accountability framework for assessing new strategies of broadening participation. Next slide, please. So these are the salient elements of the reports that we have just released. You need to know that this report basically provides the state of participation of underrepresented groups in STEM fields, and it also provides a summary of all the activities that the foundation has supported principally during the last 2 years. The reports also include a review of NSF policies, practices, and funding opportunities to broaden the participation in the STEM fields. We take a lot of time to produce summaries of all the activities that we do during those 2 years that lead up to the release of the reports. And one key element that I want to share with all of you here today, that our deliberations basically include elements that are evidence-based and that they will have a very broad impact at the foundation. And another element that we emphasize here is that because this topic of broadening participation is still a little bit misunderstood by some elements of the community, we like to share with the readers of the reports some exemplars of funding opportunities that the foundation has done during the last 2 years. And I am very happy to report to all of you that the foundation, being the premier science and engineering funding agency, has pioneered some really, really important programs. And I will emphasize that a little bit more. Next slide, please. So we have, of course, been thinking about some of the prepositions for these reports. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, this work on broadening participation is something that is still, believe it or not, remains somewhat unacknowledged, sometimes misunderstood, and in some circles undervalued, and of course understudied. So that's something that we really still need to work on. But we also think that leadership really matters to broaden the participation of underrepresented groups in the nation, so that the people who participate in science and engineering ideally one day would represent the general population in the country. We also recognize that NSF, being the premier funding agency, can still do more to increase knowledge and awareness of invisibility issues in the STEM communities. We can perhaps identify the participation and advancement of underrepresented groups in the scientific enterprise, and knowledge that is meaningful for the development of leadership. And so these are the premises, if you like, for the recommendation that we have in the next slide here. And so we want to basically emphasize leadership as it takes place in decision-making, relationship building and networking, the development of individuals as leaders, and the willingness of all people to make the right decision and be held accountable for those decisions. We are really hoping that the foundation and the current leadership that we have, that this recommendation will be implemented. And as I mentioned some moment ago, in this report, it is now becoming our tradition to kind of tell the readers and the leadership of NSF, well, you have already undertaken some activities. So there are some example programs that NSF has already initiated, and I'm almost certain that some of you here today know that there are some very unique programs for which NSF has been the pioneer in this domain, in this area. And those programs are such as the EPSCOR program, the Mid-Career Advancement, and the Advanced program. So all of these initiatives, I think, can give us a little bit of indication as to how we can implement this recommendation. The only issue that we have right now, that these programs that I just mentioned to you have not really reached out the broad community that we want to reach, namely the underrepresented groups, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans. So that's something that we are going to work in the future. Next slide, please. As mentioned a moment ago, our work is evidence-based. We really follow the trends. We really work with the statistics. On this slide that you see here, which is included in the report, on the right-hand side, you can see the US population categorized by the different groups here. Actually, if you look at the data for the census 2020, women in total population now represents roughly 51%. And then when you go to the left-hand side of this figure, or this bar chart, you can see that when we now group the individuals for the science and engineering occupations, that's when we really have a tremendous mismatch. A mismatch in the case that white women, for example, according to the statistics of 2019, only represent 17.7% of the science and engineering occupations. And if you read the latest reports, this number of 17.7 is appreciably much lower because women have been more severely impacted by the pandemic. So clearly this data tells us here that we need to do a much better job so that we can have ideally all the composition that we have in the US population to participate in the science and engineering. Next slide, please. And if we project, for example, as to what would happen to the demographics in the country, this figure that you see here is included in the CEOSE report 2017-2019. And here we have the percentage of public school students enrolled in pre-kindergarten through grade 12. And we have the statistics for years 2000, 2015. These are actually real data sets that we analyze. And then we have the projection for fall 2027, which is 6 years from now. So in the year 2000, school children represented from the white community 61%. But in 6 years from now, they would only represent 45%. And then the African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and other races will actually represent the majority. And you can see here that there are some really interesting trends, such as in the Hispanic community. There is a very rapid population growth there. And the census 2020 actually revealed that that growth is more rapid than what the statistics here show. So we really need to then work really hard on these issues. And I will invite here the CEO's Vice Chair to actually speak to all of you about the recommendation and as to how we can work together. Okay?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jose. And everyone, I'm so pleased to be with you today. And Jose laid out for us the report and the evidence behind the recommendations that we have. If we can see the next slide, please. My duty right now is just to walk through what those recommendations are and open it up for discussion in terms of ways forward. So how can the National Science Board support and advance the 2019-2020 CEOSE recommendation to NSF? And we have a few ideas. And again, this is just leading up to our ability to have a really good discussion about this throughout the rest of this period. The first idea here is to help envision leadership strategies. And what are those leadership strategies that will help to broaden participation and actually identify the missing millions and have greater engagement of underrepresented groups and underserved groups in STEM fields? And one of the areas that we need to think through is not only what those programs or what those activities could look like, but also how does broadening participation work, and how can we have accountability and metrics around how these activities will work? And CEOSE and the National Science Board could work together. We could also look and work with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, NCSES, as you do already on many things and many data focused activities. We can work with the NSF Includes, which again was started based on a prior report of CEOSE. There are other networks that we can also engage. And so how can we engage networks, engage existing resources, and focus in on accountability of advancement in this area of broadening participation in STEM? The second one is to promote the development and mentoring of leadership as part of center-wide activities. The National Science Foundation funds many scientific engagements, some for individual PIs or smaller teams, but some are very large scale in nature, large center activities. Are there ways in which we can look at the leadership of those programs or those centers to foster broadening participation in those areas? And how can leaders be developed within those centers as well? That is something that we are putting forth as one possibility. So leadership development and mentoring. CEOSE and the National Science Board have a brief that's titled Value of Broadening Participation Mentoring for Succeeding in STEM Leadership Positions. And that highlights the voices and experiences of members of CEOSE and NSB. So that's another example. That was number one, accountability. Number two, leadership and fostering leadership within potentially some of these larger and center-wide activities. And the third is really to look at, well, what are some of those leadership skills among the NSF directorates and volunteers also that could be exemplars of strategies in leadership development. Again, CEOSE and the National Science Board members could share pilot program opportunities, share information about those, and or nominate exemplars in leadership development. So we could work together to try to determine what exists already that we can say and showcase as ways in which we can move forward. And so these recommendations all again go back to the important part of this particular report, looking at making visible the invisible and how does leadership have a role in that. And so at this point, next slide, please. I think we just want to thank you for listening and open it up for questions. Back to you, Jose.
Thank you so much, Kaye. We are here to welcome any comments, suggestions, or we might even be able to answer some of the questions you may have. Thank you for your attention too.
Well, thank you too. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble starting up my video. Although I think it's just not working for me for some reason or other. Okay. Well, I am back now. Thank you. I apologize for that, Jose. I was giving you as much bandwidth as I could. This was a wonderful presentation for us, particularly helpful in indicating ways that we at NSF, the foundation and the board could work with you together. I mean, it's very inspiring. It's also inspiring to see that some of our things that we're also beginning ourselves are priorities for you. As chair of the Oversight Committee, I think particularly of your mention of the emphasis on an accountability framework and metrics. We're really proud of that and trying to work it through. And I look forward to engaging, as the board and the foundation do look forward to engaging with you. I'd like to say at this point that for those interested in more information about CEOSE and the 2019 to 2020 report, we encourage you to visit the NSF Office of Integrated Activities webpage, and where you'll find details, and an executive summary of the report, of course, is in your board book. And now, I would like to actually remind board members that if you'd like to ask a question, please use your virtual hand. If you have questions for Dr. Fuentes and Dr. Husband, we have Husband's Feeling, excuse me. And so I'll take the host prerogative and just ask the first question to get things going. And after that, I will, of course, turn it over to our chair, Dr. Ochoa, who will moderate the discussion. So my first question would be, in the matter of, for example, metrics and accountability, have you been able at all to assess how CEOSE's 2017-18 recommendations, that is the past report, have helped further, how NSF's response to these have helped further broader participation of researchers and workers in the STEM field? I wonder if you have any data.
We have some data, and I would say to you that data that we have is quite mixed. In some areas, we are seeing some progress, but in other areas, we don't see much progress. And in some areas, such as computer science, we have had in the past some trends. They are beginning to improve, but the key and short answer I will give you is that we have is still a lot of work to do. In regard to the metrics or the accountability, perhaps Kaye can say a word or two to that question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that I want to go back and look at that particular report, and you're referencing the 17-18 report, where we wanted to see more community voices in research. I think that's the one you're referencing. I don't have the data on that, but what I can say, it has given me the platform in many different instances with researchers, not only on my campus, but researchers that are funded by NSF, to engage in a real dialogue on how to structure research projects that really have the human condition in mind and want to get after issues regarding individuals or communities, and what is the better way to structure that engagement. One particular example, I was at an NSF-sponsored workshop not long ago, and it was about environmental science and also ethics, and it included members of the community in the dialogue. And it was a richer outcome scientifically in terms of what we could expect from that project, not only because we had ethics in, together with this science, what the engineers were doing, so engineering, ethics, and responsible research, but also we had a great infusion of information and knowledge from communities involved in that particular project. So I know of anecdotal evidence, but you're completely right. We need to have structured evidence so that we can better say what the impact of the report is, but even more so, what is the impact of the science that evolves when we make these adjustments in terms of the processes that we use? So it's a great question, and it's something that we really do need to build that capacity to have the proper assessment and engagement.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Ellen, I'll go back to you.
Thank you so much, Anila, and thank you to Jose and Kaye. And I see a few hands up, and we'll start with Punch.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Anila, for the session. And Jose and Kaye, delighted to see you guys again. And it's been truly a pleasure working with you and the CEOSE group. And I just want to say many, many thanks. The report is great. And I think the recommendations is something that we are taking very seriously at NSF. As you always know, we take every CEOSE report very seriously and work through that. The other piece of good news I want to share with you, which you know already, and my fellow colleagues in the board, is that we essentially took the CEOSE co-chair, so Alicia Needler, if you recall, is now leading the entire portfolio of broadening participation at NSF. And so you know that she, who has been part of the creation of the report itself, she and I are deeply committed to ensuring that we are following through with the recommendations, as well as on the accountability piece, which I want to reflect upon, is the availability of data. And sometimes, data availability is our challenge. It's not that, we want to hold ourselves accountable and the community at the same time. So gathering data is something we're going to be working very hard at. And again, Alicia leads that portfolio too. So we will see a lot more progress, as I say, at speed and scale in this area. So thank you so much for all your efforts. I just want to express my gratitude.
Thank you so much. And I've learned quite a bit from working with Alicia and Jose throughout the last 3 or 4 years on CEOSE. And now also Karen Marangel is your COO, and I'm on the EHR committee. And what has been happening in the Education and Human Resources Directorate regarding broadening participation is quite evident as well. And so that, very much structured within the National Science Foundation and several directorates, but especially the one that I just called out, and obviously CEOSE. We're just really pleased to see NSF put this is a priority. As Dr. Sargent said earlier, it is a priority.
Punch, I only want to say that I'm still sad that Alicia left CEOSE, but I am very proud that NSF got a true leader, someone who's deeply committed to broadening participation. So my sadness will go away, but she will bring a lot of expertise to NSF. So I'm very pleased about that.
And Vic, I think we have time for your question.
Thank you, Ellen. And thank you, Kaye and Jose. A great presentation. It's good to see you both again. Yesterday, we had a great panel that talked about narrative in terms of the uneven geography of K through 12 and getting students, particularly students of color, into STEM, and that how, whilst the science itself and the math itself always remains the same, the metaphors we use have to be different for different communities, rural communities, urban communities, tribal communities. On the other side of that, there's also, how do we also maybe have to articulate the value proposition of having a broad, domestic, diverse STEM workforce? And I'll give you an example. The Chief of Naval Research, Lauren Selby, has always said just recently that diversity is this country's greatest strength. We just don't know how to use it. And so, particularly in STEM. So does CEOSE have any insights on the narrative from an employer's perspective or a politician's perspective on why broadening participation is important beside just altruistic reasons?
We haven't really dealt much with our policymakers or especially members of the United States Congress. But not too long ago, I think it was in the 1916, 17, we were interacting with some employers. And I still remember that companies such as Boeing were expressing exactly what you just said, Victor, that we really need to pay attention to diversity And they actually, in the private sector, some companies are very intentional as to how they promote diversity and, more importantly, and to the topic of these reports, leadership. So I think that's a really important observation, and we at CEOSE always welcome this suggestion. I think we need to do probably a better job to reach out to our policymakers, we will actually follow that up and see whether that is something that we can do as a committee. Kaye, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would, because I think there's a policy side, and we need to be able to have an evidence-based story, which is what Dr. McCrary is saying. And we have to assemble that information in a robust fashion, longitudinal information as well. But I also see, sitting in Georgia, sitting in Atlanta, I see companies making that statement with their feet. Amazon, Cisco, Microsoft, many companies are coming to areas where the expectation is they will have a diverse pool of talent to access, because their products and their, aside from, as you said, the mission, it's the productivity, the competitiveness is enhanced when they have access to a diverse pool of talent. And I'm here at AAAS today. This is why I have this background. I'm on the board of AAAS, and we've been talking about that yesterday and today as well. And the statement that we make often is science for all. And when we're talking about broadening participation, it's also, you know, I'm sitting in Atlanta, but Carrollton, Georgia has an amazing company that is doing great things for students that are in high school, so that the participation rate and graduation rate has gone from the 60s to the 90s because of the investment that that company is making. And so again, I'm telling you stories, I'm telling you anecdotes, and you're challenging us to be able to not only have those stories, but also have a robust layer of, you know, I'm an economist, quantitative evidence to go along with that, so that it's very, very clear to our policymakers that the proof is in the pudding, and science for all is very much also science in effort for our competitiveness as a nation. So I think that I not only believe it, but I believe that there's support for that in the evidence.
Thank you.
Well, let's take a couple extra minutes and get to Suresh Babu's question.
Okay, so thank you very much. While you are talking, while looking at the report of the CEOSE, maybe do we collaborate with trade organizations like the Manufacturing Association, so that what do their feedback to us? So do we get that kind of feedback? Can you comment on it, please?
I don't think that we have received feedback from a specific company on the recommendation that we have made on the reports. This is perhaps something that Alicia may want to address in case she is here listening to us. Alicia, would you say some words to that?
I'll chime in quickly. We do have certain organizations that are liaised to the CEOSE committee that we distribute the report to them and give them time to look it over, and they come back and report out. I don't know that the one that you mentioned specifically is part of our regular liaisons, but we have a long distribution list of organizations that receive the report, and then we leave it open for them to provide us feedback.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I would say to you that at least the immediate past leadership of CEOSE and the current one, we really do, I would say, a very good job in terms of distributing the reports and also making presentations at universities, professional societies, and we do gather that input from those stakeholders. We really do a fine job, I think, in terms of the distribution of the reports, the explanation of its content, and more importantly, the feedback that we get from them. It's really inspiring, to be honest with you, when we go out to the community and share what we have done within CEOSE. Perhaps Kaye would like to say the last word for this question.
Well, just that I'm really thrilled with the suggestion that we do more in terms of those types of that feedback and partnerships, and with, you know, the potential for even more engagement in that respect with the new directorate. There's a lot that can be done here on the private sector side, in addition to public sector, obviously, and academic sector. So it's a great idea. I mean, this was our intention to get feedback so that we know ways in which we can improve not only on where we're going with our next report, but also to enhance the distribution and pickup and impact of the current report. So thank you for the comment.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you again, Jose and Kaye, for this report and for taking the time to brief us on it today. We look forward to continuing our engagement with CEOSE as we move ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having us. And I want to tell all the members present here today that we have had outstanding support from the three of you, Anelia Sargent, Elena Ochoa, and Victor McCreary. We hope that we will continue with these conversations and we will count on your support. Thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you.